Hello and welcome to Lightning Talks. This is season 6, episode 2. We are coming to you once again live from the Seattle Aquarium on the shores of Puget Sound in the traditional and contemporary territories of the Coast Salish people. And we often have people joining us for these episodes from around the world. So whether you're down the street or in another country, thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Nora Nickum. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the VP of Conservation Programs and Partnerships here at the Seattle Aquarium. And I am thrilled to have an episode that is focused on whales. Whales are some of my favorite animals. And in my free time, one of my things that I love to do is write books for kids. And I have published 4 books so far, and every single one of them has had whales in it. So that just shows you how excited I am about these amazing animals. The most recent book, 12 Daring Greys, just came out last week, and I'm especially excited for this one. And our second speaker this evening is going to tell us more about research and the history of these amazing visitors to our local waters. Now, when I'm doing research for my books for kids, I love turning up fascinating facts. So I have to share a couple of my favorite whale facts with you this evening. The first one is that whales do not all have the same number of blowholes. Baleen whales have 2 blowholes, toothed whales like orcas have 1 blowhole. And scientists think that the second nasal passage for these orcas and other toothed whales may be what evolved to help them with vocalizing and echolocating. My second favorite fact, which is even more fun, I think, is that blue whales, which are, of course, the largest animals on our planet, have tongues that weigh as much as hippos. So imagine that. Hard to fathom. Now, as we dive into our Lightning Talks, let me tell you a little bit more about how Lightning Talks works. So we have 5 speakers, and they each have exactly 5 minutes to share one big idea. And we're holding them to those 5 minutes. So they're going to have warning lights that come up when they have 1 minute left, when they have 30 seconds left, and when they're at time. And if they keep going with their presentation, they're going to get the infamous lightning bolt. So along the way, I hope you'll help me root for at least one of our speakers to get the lightning bolt so we live up to the Lightning Talks name. Also throughout the episode, I hope you will add comments in the chat and also questions. You can submit questions there in the chat. You can also use the QR code if you don't have access to the chat. And we're going to draw on all of your questions for the great Q&A and discussion at the end when we bring all of our speakers back onto the Lightning Talk stage. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's science event, we would love it if you would donate to help us advance our mission of inspiring conservation of the marine environment. We also do all things whale related. We help pass policies to protect whales. We contribute to research. And so your donations help us do that important conservation work. And I want to give a special thanks and shout out to those of you who donated when you registered for this event. It was very helpful and we greatly appreciate it. So now it's time to jump into our speakers. And our first speaker, who I'm thrilled to welcome to the stage, is my colleague here at the Seattle Aquarium, Jessica Kola. Jessica here is a marine science interpreter at the Seattle Aquarium, where she shares her passion for ocean conservation through accessible science education. She has over a decade of experience in marine research and outreach across the Pacific, and she seeks to inspire ocean stewardship from the largest whale to the smallest plankton. Jess, are you ready to kick us off?
Yes, I'm very excited.
Get your slides up. Take it away.
I'm all the way at the end. Don't look. There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nora. I'm very excited to be here today talking about one of my favorite animals. I've been very lucky to work with humpbacks for several years, but I also think that whales are one of the best examples of successful marine science conservation, perhaps in human history. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I actually am going to start with a little bit of audience participation before I give you any content. So I actually want everybody to close your eyes and picture a whale. There are over 90 different species of whales, including dolphins and porpoises. So chances are everybody online is thinking of something that's a little bit different. And for fun, why don't you take the mental image and write the name of the whale that you're imagining and pop it in the chat. And let's see what kind of biodiversity we're able to create as an audience here with Lightning Talks today. As everybody's doing that, every one of our mental images falls under one very large group, an infraorder, which is known as Cetacea. And Cetacea literally translates to giant sea creature or even sea monster, and that's in reference to the size of some of the species that fall into the order. For example, blue whales, the largest whale species and one of the largest animals to ever be on this planet, can easily grow up over 100 feet long. But there are also several species that are quite a bit smaller than that. A very popular one is the little vaquita, which is a porpoise that only gets about 4 or even 5 feet long and barely scratches 100 pounds. That being said, my job is to simplify today. So instead of talking about all this biodiversity, I'm actually going to be talking about the two main classifications of whales, which are mysticetes and odontocetes. Now, odontocete literally translates to toothed whales. So if you think of dentist or orthodontist, that's in reference to teeth as well. Whereas mysticete is in reference to bearded whale. And that's because their feeding mechanism looks much more similar to essentially a mustache hanging from their upper lip. And they are named literally after their feeding mechanism. So a little bit of a deeper dive. Odontocetes have teeth, just like humans do. It's dentin, covered in a coating of enamel, and they use it for capturing and consuming larger prey. So that could be fish, squid, even marine mammals, which you can see here. Whereas mysticetes are filter feeders. And as filter feeders, they use a different mechanism, which are long strips of fringed keratin, which is called baleen. And the baleen are used to trap very large quantities of very small food within their mouth. And that can be krill and other types of crustaceans, and it can also be small shoaling fish. And baleen whales are capable of filter feeding in the water column and also on the seafloor in the sediment. And Nora already kind of alluded to this one, which makes my job easier, but there are two different kinds of blowholes that are easy to distinguish between mysticetes and odontocetes. Now, blowholes are essentially whale nostrils. It's the start of the respiratory system. And in mysticetes, there are two or a pair of openings. And that is because many animals that fall into this group are very large, which means they need high volume gas exchange in order to get big breaths for that big lung capacity. On the other hand, odontocetes, like she mentioned, have a single blowhole, and that is because scientists think that the other nasal passage closed off over evolutionary time, and that allowed for the development or the evolution of sound generating organs that are located within the head. Which brings us to our last slide. Our last topic is vocalization. All whales that are capable of vocalization are essentially recycling air from different parts of their body and passing it over a structure, but the mechanism is different. So on mysticetes, on the mysticete side, they actually are moving air between the lungs and the laryngeal sac, which is in the larynx or the throat. And as it moves back and forth, it passes over a vocal fold that's kind of in a U shape, and it very much resembles our vocal cords, and it creates almost a humming sound that's more low frequency, and they can tighten it or relax it if they want to adjust the pitch. Odontocetes are a little bit different. They basically make noise in their nose. They've got nasal sacs that move air back and forth across a structure called phonic lips, and the phonic lips will buzz, very similar to a trumpet player buzzing their lips to play their instrument. And they can use it for social communication, but they can also use it for echolocation that's specific to odontocetes, and they target that sound wave using an oily and fatty structure on their forehead, which is called a melon. That sound is emitted and bounce off of a target, reverberates back, transitioning those vibrations up the jaw to the ear bone, which then sends information to the brain. Now, as you guys can see, that was a very quick, very short 3 examples on how to distinguish between those different groups. But there are many ways to distinguish, and also there's a lot of variation within these groups as well. So I'm really excited to hear what everyone has to say, and thank you all so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Jess. I've never thought of baleen whales having something like a mustache or orcas being like trumpet players. So those are great analogies to help us learn some of those differences. You know a lot about whales and you know a lot about conservation. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of how knowing all these differences between different kinds of whales can help us target good conservation measures to those different species.
Yeah, absolutely. In my line of work as a marine science interpreter, there's always this kind of behind the scenes method of like, so what? Why should we know this information? And being able to classify these whales and know their different life strategies not only illuminates information about their feeding, their breathing. It can impact how they use their habitats, for example, and migration patterns. But knowing that information helps us to conserve these animals because then we know what types of vulnerabilities that they may have, especially in terms of human impact. So, for example, mysticetes or baleen whales filter feeding may mean that they are more susceptible to microplastics and marine pollution. They'd be able to consume that more easily. Whereas an odontocete that relies on echolocation and is very sensitive to sound may struggle in high underwater volume environments or marine sound pollution. So it helps us to be able to identify those vulnerabilities so that we can target our conservation efforts for specific species.
Great, that makes a lot of sense, and we'll definitely talk more about conservation when we all come back together at the end. So
awesome.
Thank you very much, Jess.
Thank you.
And I'm going to bring up our next speaker to the Lightning Talk stage, John Kalambokidis. John is a senior research biologist and one of the founders of Cascadia Research Collective, a nonprofit research organization based in Olympia, Washington. He has directed long-term research on the status, movements, and underwater behavior of humpback whales, blue whales, and gray whales. And he's going to introduce us to those amazing local gray whales that I mentioned briefly earlier. So, take it away, John.
Thanks. Giant 40-ton gray whales feeding in water no deeper than a typical backyard swimming pool right next to shore in our backyard. I didn't think it was possible, but then we discovered the sound. These are a unique group of gray whales that come into Puget Sound to feed. And they actually feed in the shallow water that's only about 8 to 10 feet deep, water that's so shallow they can only access it at high tide. And at low tide, their feeding pits are actually visible. These are feeding pits exposed above the water at low tide, created by a gray whale going down and scooping up the mud and feeding on the ghost shrimp. The beach would be littered with hundreds or thousands of these as these whales feed in the shallow water. And these whales surprised us because most of the gray whales migrate past Washington on this yellow line that you see going up the coast. But this small group of gray whales makes this detour, comes down the Strait of Juan de Fuca, has to find the entrance to Admiralty Inlet, come around Whidbey Island, and come to this area here to feed on these dense ghost shrimp beds. And they're part of the eastern North Pacific gray whale population and migrates all the way from Mexico up to the Arctic. But somehow this small group of gray whales has decided to make this detour to feed. And why is that? And part of the reason that we've discovered is because gray whales are facing a major crisis on their feeding grounds up in the Arctic. This is the population size of gray whales over the last 30 years. And you'll see in the last 10 years, it's declined from over 27,000 to 13,000. So to less than half what it was 10 years ago. And the number of calves born has declined down to the lowest numbers ever seen. And we think that's because of lack of food up in the Arctic for them. So these gray whales that come into Puget Sound are searching for a place to feed. And you can see that their numbers have grown. In the 90s, when we first discovered them, there were only about 4 or 5, 6 of them that came for a few months at a time in the year. In the early 2000s, that doubled. And then here again, in recent years, it's become even bigger, with some whales staying throughout the entire year. And we've named these individuals. It's the same ones coming back. This is a chart of the different individuals and their names and sex. And then going from 1990, when we first discovered them, to now, all of these shaded blocks show years they were seen. So many of these whales coming back every year for over 35 years. And you can see the initial small group over here of a half dozen, then joined by this other animals here, and then now this full list being filled out with these animals that have joined us in most recent years. And part of why they're doing this is they found a really rich prey resource. Working with our partners at SR3, we've seen that these gray whales are rapidly changing body condition. This is the same whale photographed from the air, just a few months apart, going from a skinny whale on arrival to a fat, chubby whale just a few months later. Not all whales show this same rapid growth, but most of them are gaining in body condition. So this is a great area for them to feed. And we've been able to document some of their behavior by deploying these tags on them. This is something that we've done initially by approaching them in a small boat. Here we are collecting a sample and deploying a tag with a long pole. But now we've also developed less invasive procedures like this video you see on the right, where we've actually able to drop the tag from a drone to attach to the whale. And that's something that has allowed us to attach tags over a number of years and analyze that data, working with researchers, particularly down at Stanford. Hannah Clayton, that you see here, is doing her PhD dissertation on the sounder gray whales. And these tags give us lots of data, but they also give us video, which you see here, dual video from the back of a whale, like you're riding on the back of a whale. And in this case, we quickly learned how much body contact these whales had with each other. Right there, this whale bumped against the other whale and actually turned the tag around to be facing backwards instead of forward, which actually turned out to be kind of interesting because it ended up filming that this whale, one of the pioneering first whales, was being followed into the shallows by 3 different whales following right behind her. So it turned out to be interesting. And these tags have helped us document their feeding behavior in shallow water. They dive down just, 5 or 6 feet. This is the picture of the bottom from the tag on the whale, and all of these holes are little filter feeding holes of ghost shrimp. And here you see, I'll just say, the sounders have found this refuge to deal with the shortage of food and learn how to feed and survive better. And you can find more information on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for giving us the lightning, and thank you for your presentation and those amazing videos. That's just incredible what you can learn from that whale's back view. Given, you showed on the map that it's a pretty big detour out of their normal migration route up to the Arctic. How do you think they found food so many miles off their usual path?
Well, I really think it boils down to those pioneering initial individuals, because some of them we saw actually wander around as if they were looking for a place to feed. And then once they discovered that spot, they learned to come back there every year. And because they're so social, it seems like other gray whales now, as they come in, they see these other whales feeding, and like that tag, are able to learn from them the good areas to feed and when to get in there to feed and not get stranded, because if they stayed too long, as the tide dropped, they'd be high and dry.
Yeah, so maybe some of the other ones also see them turning off the usual path and think those whales must know something.
Yeah.
To see what they're after. So interesting. Well, I'm glad they're finding food here, and I hope the others find more food too. Thank you very much, John. We're going to bring you back in a little bit for questions from the audience. And in the meantime, here is John Zardis, our next speaker. John comes to us from the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, where he's the head of the biology department and a professor of marine biology. John has wide-ranging expertise, which includes the biology of invertebrate larvae and the biology of symbiosis, especially the association of barnacles with sea turtles and whales. So let's learn more about those barnacles.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be talking to you this evening about barnacles associated with whales. I'm an invertebrate zoologist, and my specialty is in epizoic barnacles, barnacles that live on other animals. The scientific name for barnacles in general is Cirripedia, which means feather feet. But what are barnacles anyway? Just to be clear, they are alive and they are animals. More specifically, they are crustacean arthropods. Two important groups of the Cirripedia include the acorn barnacles with volcano-shaped shells and the gooseneck barnacles with a muscular stalk. Confusion persisted for a long time about what kind of animals barnacles are because they possess both a calcified shell like a mollusk that grows with them and a thin covering that they molt like an arthropod. It turns out that among the 50,000 or so species of crustaceans, the barnacles are unique in having a shell. Internally, the business end of a barnacle is the feathery cirri, or legs, which they extend to filter food from the water. Essentially, a barnacle is a shrimp-like crustacean in a shell, living on its head and kicking with its legs to feed. It gets a little weirder when you look at the early life stages of barnacles. Ever wondered where all those barnacles on your boat come from? Barnacles have a larval stage called the nauplius that swims and feeds in the plankton. And weirder yet, after molting 6 times to a larger version, the nauplius transforms into a final larval stage called the cypris. This stage swims but does not feed. It relies on energy stored away during its time as a nauplius. The cypris is specialized for selecting a substratum and attaching to it, and is the only larval stage that can attach. It has about a 2-week window in which to search out and find a suitable site and affix to it before it runs out of energy. Upon finding an appropriate substratum, the cypris releases adhesive from its front antennules and glues itself down. Selecting when and where to attach is a critical moment in the life of every barnacle. At this stage, it makes the crucial choice of selecting a substratum that is durable, safe from predators, and that facilitates feeding. It is clear this is not a random event, but exactly how a larva chooses its substratum is still enigmatic. We know important cues for attachment include surface texture, surface chemistry, water flow, microbial biofilms, and maybe even the polar charge of the surface. Understanding barnacle attachment and surface selection is still a work in progress. This is where whales come into the picture. Barnacles that live on whales select only certain species of whales and even certain locations on their hosts. Shown here is the coronet barnacle that is an epibiont mainly of humpback whales. Not parasites in the sense of feeding on their hosts, barnacles are mostly not harmful to whales, but they may not be beneficial either, though there is speculation that whales could use them as armor or weapons during clashes. This is primarily a one-sided relationship called a commensalism that benefits the epibiont, but is neutral for the host. Yet it must be noted that a humpback may carry as much as 1,000 pounds of barnacles with it, which obviously comes at some cost. Barnacles initially attach by glue, but in the lower right panel, you see how in the coronet barnacle, the underside of the shell is built with channels into it, which the whale skin grows to gain a secure grip. In the lower left panel, you can see pigmentation marks remaining in the whale's skin where barnacles were previously attached. Cetacean skin grows quickly, as do the barnacles, probably rapidly downward to keep pace with the cetacean skin growing upward. After about a year's time, the barnacles fall off or are knocked off by the host. There are 6 species of acorn barnacles and 1 gooseneck barnacle that live only on whales. The upper 2 barnacles are very selective, the one on the left living only on right whales, and the one on the right living only on California gray whales. The Queen's coronet barnacle at lower right lives on multiple whale species and grows under the skin a bit. The rabbit-eared barnacle at lower left is a gooseneck barnacle that attaches just to the shell of other barnacles, not actually to the whale. It is, so to speak, then, a whale barnacle. One of the more remarkable whale barnacles is another species that lives only on right whales. Right whales bear rough patches of dense keratin or cornified skin called callosities. Essentially, this is their facial hair occurring on the chin, around the lips, above the eyes, and on the forehead. There is one barnacle specialized for burrowing into this callosity material, and that is Tubicinella major, looking something like a dainty French cake. Completely cylindrical, it burrows in with its top flush to the surface of the callosity. This photo was taken from a southern right whale off the coast of Argentina and shows a patch of callosity riddled with Tubicinella barnacles. Though known for hundreds of years, the biology of this and most whale barnacles remains largely unknown. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I had no idea there were whale barnacles.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. And I just can't imagine how these little larvae find a whale to live on.
Yeah, I mean, chemistry seems to be, of course, an important part of it, but there are a lot of other aspects that are involved. How do they get close enough to find a whale in the first place? to
Yeah.
test the chemistry.
One other question I have for you, since the barnacles fall off the whales, is there a way to look at the barnacles and learn something about the whales that they lived on?
Yeah, people have done some interesting studies looking at barnacle shells. As shelled animals grow in the water, they take up isotopic signatures of the water they live in. And as barnacles that live on animals that are mobile, as those hosts move around, the barnacles are transported into different waters. So you can see over time different isotopic signatures in the shell, which can give you an indication of where the animals have moved. People have done this with barnacles taken from living hosts, not yet with fossils, but that would be a really interesting approach, perhaps. Whales follow migratory routes, and maybe it's possible to find fossil material or fallen material along those routes that might add some information as well.
Wow, that's amazing. I look forward to seeing what else you and other scientists are able to learn. Thank you very much, John. I hope there will be lots of barnacle questions for you in the chat, and I look forward to bringing you back in a few minutes. So our next speaker is going to be Jen Tackaberry. Bring her up here to the stage. Hi, Jen. Jen co-directs a new initiative at Cascadia Research Collective that's focused on improving whale entanglement research and response and training along the U.S. West Coast. She studies whale populations and behavior, and she is also a level 5 responder with the Large Whale Entanglement Response Network. Ready to hear you talk all about whale entanglement and disentanglement, Jen.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. And just to start, imagine sitting in a small boat holding a rope, and on the other end of that rope is a 40-ton animal having one of the worst days of its life. And with that said, welcome to the world of large whale entanglement response. So at Cascadia, we have the Partnership for West Coast Whale Entanglement Action. And our team is just part of a regional, national, and global network of trained authorized responders. So everything that I talk about today revolves around the work of responders that are trained and authorized by NOAA. Within our program, it's sort of built on the trifecta of response, research, and training, where we feel that real-time response combined with targeted research is really the only way to work towards long-term prevention. And that is both to improve animal welfare on an individual level, but also the broader recovery of large whale populations. Now, I understand seeing a whale is, a unique experience for a lot of people, but I wanted to basically walk through what's involved with an entanglement response. And to do that, I'm introducing you to Starry Night, which is a 1-year-old humpback whale that got entangled not once, but twice up here in Washington last year. So during a response, we got a report from the whale watching company about an entangled whale, and the whale museum team was able to go out and put a tracking buoy. And then the next day, they worked with us from our small inflatable, it was their small inflatable, but we work on small inflatables. We never get in the water with whales. We do everything from boats. And really our main goal is to get a hold of that line, pull ourselves closer to the whale. We have the engines out of the water to keep us safe and to keep the whale safe. And we're moving these large buoys closer and closer to the animal to try and slow them down and also keep them at the surface. None of us are strong enough to overpower a whale. And so we have to use sort of flotation to allow us access to the animal. Otherwise, they would dive and just go on longer dives to get away from us. So as we pull ourselves closer to the whale, we need a better view of what's going on. So we use long poles and things like GoPros that we can stick under the surface of the water to really document where the gear is on the whale and what the entanglement configuration is. And that allows us to come up with a game plan. Then we can figure out what lines need to be cut in what order so that we can ensure that we remove all the life-threatening gear. And with that, we use poles with hooked knives and specialized gear to be able to cut those lines without hurting the whale. And in this case, we were able to retrieve the gear so that we could then take that and analyze it and figure out what the whale was entangled in and how we can help prevent the next one. with this. So in the whale watching community from the Pacific Whale Watch Association was able to document Starry Night a few days later to let us know how it was healing and what the wounds looked like. So in Starry Night's case, responses are really important for that individual whale, sort of giving them a second chance at life. But there are a lot of cases, these are photos of just previous cases from the last year or so, that sometimes the whale is in such poor condition that even if we remove all the gear from that whale, it's not going to survive. So really every response is an opportunity for us to go out there and collect the data to prevent the next entanglement. At Cascadia, since we do long-term population studies, it's a perfect combination of that long-term study combined with the data we collect during responses, and that allows us to find solutions through that combination. So we can really determine who's getting entangled, where they're interacting with the gear, not just being reported, how they're interacting with the gear, say in the water column, what the whales are actually getting entangled in. And then we can also use long-term studies such as SCAR studies to determine how these mitigation efforts or changes in gear configuration or timing is reducing entanglements in the long run. We work a lot with different teams up and down the entire US West Coast. So we'll go down to different spots and work with the local teams to give them more experience, to share our experiences, and really just grow the capacity along the entire coastline. And there are opportunities like this outreach and education that we're able to interact with the public to basically just raise your awareness about this issue, and then also provide some guidance as to how you can actually help these whales. And one of the big parts you can be part of the solution is to support your local entanglement response team. With that said, there are teams all up and down the West Coast, as well as nationally and globally, that would really benefit from your help. And then if you do find a whale in distress, please don't attempt to remove any gear from it. A lot of times you might, people might remove sort of a buoy that's far out, or cut some of the gear that's far from the animal, but that really makes it really hard for us to get a hold of that animal to ensure that all the life-threatening gear is removed. So the best thing is for you to stand by and report it either to the hotline, or if you don't have cell, to the US Coast Guard. And you can learn more on our website, and really appreciate any opportunity for you to learn more about this topic.
Thank you so much, Jen. That is such important work, and it's so important that you're not just helping individual whales, but looking at how to prevent this from happening to more whales in the future. I was wondering, I think you've worked with different species of whales, and I'm wondering how the approach to disentanglement and the experience differs depending on what kind of whale it is.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have had the experience of working with a lot of different species, and both on the East and West Coast, and sort of each species has its own sort of method of survival, sort of fight or flight, whereas sort of a humpback whale might, in its natural world, fight a predator off, whereas something that's fast, like a fin whale or blue whale, might try and run and outpace those whales. So working with these animals, it's really just, they do have, I don't want to say different personalities, but like with the North Atlantic right whale, it is a very strong animal. And so with authorized trainers, it gives you permission based on different species that you work with. And so if you work with a North Atlantic right whale, you're sort of the highest level, that they ensure that you have experience working with that specific whale. And so you can really predict their behavior and know when you have to back off to make sure that your team is safe and that the whale is as safe as possible.
Okay, so yes, when I introduced you, I said you were a level 5. So that's what you're referring to now on the different authorizations you have.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so as you gain experience and you sort of work with different teams and sort of an apprenticeship, it takes a number of years and a lot of cases to work up to be able to lead a team safely when dealing with these whales. Unfortunately, they are sort of having their worst day, and they tend not to know that we're there helping them. So it takes a lot to make sure that you're keeping your team safe.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Jen. We'll see you again in a few minutes for some more Q&A and discussion. And I am excited to bring up our final speaker for this evening, Daniel Zitterbart. Dan is an associate scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and he's been researching ways to detect marine life at the surface of the water since 2009. He's also the co-founder and chief scientist of Whale Spotter, where he brings deep scientific expertise and advances techniques for monitoring marine mammals in real time. So we'll get your presentation ready, Dan. It looks great. Take it away.
So what I'm going to talk today is I'm going to present you Whale Spotter, our Whale Spotter technology. Basically, the whole idea is how can we give captains ample information day and night when there's whales in front of them to avoid ships hitting whales. You might not know that, but ocean roadkill is actually a problem. Globally, we estimate that more than 10,000 whales annually are killed by vessel strike. And locally, in the Pacific Northwest, for example, the southern resident killer whale is highly endangered. In the Northeast, the North Atlantic right whale is highly endangered, with 384 individuals left, but out of those, only 70 female whales. So each female whale you kill has massive population level consequence for the whole population. So protecting individuals is super important. And vessel strike is the second largest reason for North Atlantic right whale deaths, human-induced deaths. And so our idea and our technology works based on thermal imaging. We have a thermal camera that measures the apparent heat difference between a whale's blow and the water surface. And you can see this here on the top left. In the first image, there is nothing. The whale comes to the surface and breathes, and then you can see the spout going up, and then the spout disappearing again. And we use a machine learning model or an AI, however you want to call it, to detect those and provide this information to our captains in real time, as I said, day and night, because it's thermal imaging. And this is, we also have color cameras with that to take pictures and identify the species. And here's some examples. So these are fully autonomously taken pictures of whales. And you can see this humpback whale here on the top. We detected in 4 kilometers distance, right? It's 2.2 nautical miles. And this gives you, the captains, ample time to react and avoid the whale. Now, how does that look? The Whale Spotter itself is I call it an ugly white box. It's a lot of electronics packed into this one box, which you can put on any sort of vessel, or you can put it on land. We have it on supply vessels, on fast ferries, on slow ferries, on research vessels, cruise vessels, and container vessels. And all those vessels are now out in the ocean and detect whales. And just to give you a sense of what the distribution of our detection level is we started 7 years ago in 2019 and detected 78 whales with that technology. In 2025, we detected about 130,000, with our big two areas being the Pacific Northwest and in the Northeast. And just right here on the top left of that left image is Seattle. Each of these green dots is one whale detection we did in the area. So you can see that your area is full of baleen whales, meaning that there's a lot of vessel strike risk. And now we have the technology and the partnerships to actually avoid coming very close to those vessels and help the populations survive better. And how this looks on a vessel is on the top left here, you can see a bridge of a large vessel. This is a 1,000-foot long vessel. There's this little screen, that's the Whale Spotter. And on the top right, you see what the captain sees. And whenever our system detects a whale, it shows this little video to the captain with the whale blow here. You can see this little spout showing up. It tells the captain where's the animal, how far it is away, and it provides the captain information on a screen in which direction was the whale. And so what the captains now can do with that is they can avoid. And this is what we want, right? We want minimum impact on the whale, minimum impact on the ship. We want coexistence because between the vessels, we need the vessels and the whales. They were there first, it's their habitat. And here you can see a ship coming in on this blue track. And at this point, the ship detected a group of whales in about 1 kilometer distance. And this is the field of view our cameras cover. And you can see that at some point, when it detected the whales, it actually just turned its course of about a couple of degrees, 2 to 3 degrees, to port side to avoid those whales. And you can imagine how the vessel strike risk dramatically reduces when you bring a couple hundred yards between you and the whale instead of going straight over the pod of whales. And I have one more example for you, which I will play slowly. So you can see here the ship is coming in from the bottom. coming in, and suddenly it detects this group of whales, those green points here. And as soon as it does that, the captain decides, okay, I'm going to try to evade and going a little bit to starboard side. So you can see the ship turning here to the right slightly, ditching the whales on its left. Then it keeps going and the next group comes up and it's even more straight in the path of the ship. And the captain decides, okay, we need to move more this time, takes a big turn, ditches this whole big group on their left side and goes back on the original track. And we have dozens and hundreds of those examples by now. So our captains we work with love the technology, use the technology, and every day are out there to provide and protect whales. And to summarize this, our work, I've done this over 15 years, so I really want to see this being used to increase whale protection, is that thermal imaging for whale detection is now proven, matured, and routinely used. Our technology provides expert-verified, real-time, long-range whale detection. And night. And I just heard the lightning bolt. So ultimately, last sentence, the technology can provide more than 90% vessel strike risk reduction. And this is what we really care about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Around here in the Pacific Northwest, we have quite a few sightings networks, lots of people out spotting animals, whales, but when it's, foggy or at night, we really need the kind of technology that Whale Spotter provides to make sure we know where these animals are and can reduce the risks. I'm wondering, as this gets used by more different kinds of vessels and in more places and on land, if there's an area of or type of user or a location where you feel like we need to focus efforts to have more coverage, where there's more, particularly a lot of opportunity to put this technology to good use.
I mean, in your area, for example, the Juan de Fuca Strait is quite remote, right? It's really difficult to get out there, but all the ships that go into Vancouver or Seattle pass through there. And sometimes in this area, we have detections where you have 1,000 whale blows within 20 minutes. So those ships are really crossing, you would call it whale soup. There's so many whales, it's really massively increases vessel strike risk. And getting those data collected and shared in real time, ideally, would really help. And we have the capacity to share. You guys have an organization called the Whale Report Alert System, which alerts mariners in the area about whale strike or whale presence. And we share some of our data with them in real time. So even that vessels that do not have that technology on board can benefit from that.
That is great to know. Yes, I hope everyone will take advantage of it, whether they can put the technology on their ships right now or not. So that increased coverage and then using those real-time alerts really is important. So I'm going to bring all of our speakers back to the Lightning Talk stage now. Welcome back, everyone. And the audience has many great questions for you, and I have questions for you too, but I'm just wondering if any of you has a burning question for one of the other speakers to kick us off.
I could have a few, if that's okay.
Go for it.
I was curious, John, the whole theory of barnacles not just being kind of for intraspecies, but as protection and weapons against killer whales, and that the whale species that fight when they're attacked by killer whales tend to have barnacles, and the ones that tend to flee, we know how much barnacles and other things could slow you down, don't tend to have those. And I wonder if that sounds reasonable to you and what you think of that theory.
Yeah, no, there does seem to see that we do see that correlation out there, and that seems reasonable, right? We have the fight or flight types of whale behaviors, and right, those who are the fighters tend to have more barnacles. So humpback whales tend to have the heaviest loads. And my understanding, not being a real whale person, is they're some of the more fighting type whales. Jen, I have a question. I was curious, have you ever seen any barnacles on North Atlantic right whales?
Oh,
to my knowledge, none have been found. I think historically they maybe used to have them, but perhaps the whale populations have become so small that it can't sustain the barnacles.
Yeah, quickly thinking about it, I don't recall ever seeing, like their flukes are quite beautiful, I would have to reach out to some of my colleagues that still study them and just see, they do a lot of aerial, surveys, and so would definitely be able to document that.
Yeah,
but
it would be
as
very
far-
interesting to know because no one has recorded it probably in the last 100 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great topic. I'll reach out and connect you with some folks that would definitely be able to go through their images.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great connection. There are so many great questions. I'm going to have a hard time choosing. So let's just kick it off here. One question I have from the audience for John C. is, since they feed in such shallow water, you noted that these gray whales need to learn to read the tides and make sure they get off the mudflats in time. Are they pretty good at that? Are you doing that? Do we need to worry about them?
Yeah, so some of the experienced whales seem to know how to do that really well, and sometimes we see them even leaving right after the tide changes, because sometimes they're like a mile away from safe deep water. But we have had other whales, especially inexperienced whales, end up stranded on the beach and have to wait for the tide to come back in to be refloated, and that's something that can injure them. So it definitely is a risk they're facing and a challenge that most know how to deal with it. And whether sometimes we see them hanging out just off of the shallow area and almost wonder if they're trying to read that tidal change.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, hopefully they get up that learning curve quick and stay safe. Jen, questions for you about whale entanglement. So the audience is interested in knowing how prevalent this problem is. So how many whales get entangled every year? And I'm going to add to that, is there anything you can share about the success rate when you go out to disentangle them?
That's a great question, and we'd love to be able to answer it. But unfortunately, we're struggling to right now. All of the information we know about as entanglements is based on reporting rates. So it's the whales that are entangled that are actually seen and reported. And we know that that is a very small percentage of all the whales out there. If a whale gets entangled and they're miles and miles and miles offshore, their chances of being seen and reported are much lower than whales that are in, Monterey Bay or the Salish Sea or anywhere where there's a lot of whale watching effort. So it really varies by year. Last year in the US, there were, I think, 95 confirmed entanglements of all species. Last year on the US West Coast, there were 33, but it really depends on sort of oceanographic conditions sort of change where the whales are going to be, and maybe the overlap of different fisheries might be higher or lower some years. And if that overlaps in areas where there's a lot of people out there on the water watching them, then that will be a high year for entanglement reports. But if that overlap happens in areas that people aren't watching, our outer coast of Washington and Oregon, there aren't a ton of just mariners spending time with whales. And so those whales aren't going to get reported. So based on SCAR studies, different methodologies or where they are, it can be, 1 in 3 whales have been entangled at least once in their life. And so that's a pretty high number when you think about it. And those are just the survivors or the ones that the entanglement left scars on. When it comes to success rate, when we can actually get our hands on the whales, we have a really good success rate of removing the entanglement. But unfortunately, a lot of folks don't know about reporting, which I hope everyone now knows that's listening. But, reporting and standing by are huge. If the reporting party leaves the whale, the chances of us relocating it is very slim. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. And so really, we have a good success when we can actually get our hands on them. But unfortunately, for a lot of these cases, there's just no opportunity to save them.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, we need more reporting of whales that are entangled. We need more reporting of whales that aren't entangled for the whale report alert system that Dan was talking about. So whenever we see a whale, that's something we can do to help. That gets to one of the questions, which is what can people do to help whales, and especially non-scientists. So I'm hoping maybe each of you can chime in with an idea of what people can do to help. And I'm going to ask you to start, Jess, because this was particularly aimed at you after your great talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, I kind of mentioned it at the beginning of my presentation, but had to keep it at 5, that whales are one of the best examples of successful marine conservation, potentially in human history. And folks often forget that that actually started largely as a grassroots movement. We nearly hunted several different species of whales to extinction. And it wasn't until the release of the famous vinyl, like Humpback Songs, that really got complex communication and like stirred advocacy amongst the general public. And then we started to make moves towards the whaling moratorium in the 80s that allowed them time to recover. But so being here and, you know, enjoying content about whales and feeling motivated to protect them is, of course, step number 1. And it can also be intimidating being here amongst folks who are very active in whale conservation, whether it be creating data sets or creating technology or going out and physically disentangling whales. But there's a lot that you can do from your own home. For example, I mentioned that mysticetes are quite susceptible to marine pollution. So something as simple as practicing sustainability in your own home and reduce, reuse, recycle. Also being very active in advocating for policies that are environmentally aware and are very specific to, for example, sound pollution is a very popular topic here in Puget Sound and the Salish Sea. So those are just a couple of examples just right off the top of my head. But if you see an opportunity, definitely take it, because again, whales, many species of whales still exist today, largely due to grassroots movements and community just standing up for whales.
Great. Yes, it's great to have that hopeful approach that it can work. John Kalvakidis, do you have any?
Yes, well, you know, unfortunately, these are pretty tough times for whale research and whale conservation. NOAA, the main federal agency that protects whales, has lost 40% of their staff on the West Coast in the last year. So anything that people can do to aid, groups like ours that rely on NOAA, we're having to actually let go of staff and are losing our ability to continue monitoring whales because of funding cuts. I would say donate to your favorite whale research or whale conservation organization. Contact your legislators to advocate for whale management and conservation by NOAA and other groups are pretty key things right now, especially.
John Zardis, how about you? Other suggestions?
Yeah, so I probably have a little bit different perspective on this. I would say a common reaction from people is when they see barnacles on things, whether it's sea turtles or whales or whatever, is like, oh my gosh, get those things off. We have to remember they've been evolving together for 20 million years or more. And we actually don't know enough about the association to know whether it's a benefit or a harm. But nevertheless, it's a natural situation. So I would encourage, first, don't worry about removing the barnacles unless they're directly causing some damage, which you can sometimes see, and you need to do that. But, and I don't know, keep an eye out if you see a whale with barnacles. If it's not all whales have barnacles, and it would be really interesting to know for sure which barnacles occur with which whales. That can tell us things like maybe where those whales have been and a little bit about their habitat use. So we don't have a full picture on that yet. So just, take a picture and put it in iNaturalist or something like that. Could be very useful.
Yeah, and I think we have barnacles are one of the animals we have to thank for helping us identify individual whales, right? Because they leave these unique scar patterns and markings, and that helps us know, for example, who those sounders are in Puget Sound.
And I should point out, if the whales are endangered, so are the lowly barnacles. that live on them.
Yeah, especially because they can only live on certain kinds of whales, which is
It's a
not
very
very many
specific-
possible homes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan or Jen, anything to add in addition to doing good reporting to help out with the alerts and disentanglements? Dan?
I'll let Dan go first.
Okay, I go first. I would say first go watch whales, right? That's the number one, is get engaged, and seeing those animals every day, or seeing when you can them and see how they live in the natural habitat, gives you that full appreciation of how much they and the habitat deserve to be preserved. That's number one to me. Go and watch them. And then over time you get engaged, and getting engaged and is super important, right? For example, for us, knowing where to put stuff, because we know there's a lot of whales here, is really critical. We have those land-based stations, and we decide where those land-based whale spotters go, depending on where many people see a lot of whales, because we know that's a critical place, but people can only see them at night, so during the day. So you can really help together here. And at some point, when you're fully engaged, speak to your legislator. Number one of protection comes still from law, and that's a good thing, right? It comes because then it affects everybody. So when you can motivate your legislator to know, oh, so many people are caring about this, I have to do something about this because my position is on the line, that's when it makes a difference.
I think everyone covered it very well. I second what everyone said, and I think, I appreciate everyone taking their time tonight to learn more about whales, and I encourage you to now go and share this knowledge with your friends and family, and strangers that you might not think would be interested in whales. You never know, and you could be changing a whale's life by forwarding this information on to others. So, and just to throw out there for John, we've used barnacles on entanglement gear, or gear that's been on a whale, to identify where that whale or where that gear came from, or where that whale had carried that gear from. So yeah, it's helping these whales out too.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to ask a couple more quick questions because we're nearly at time, but there are so many good ones in the chat. So here's a couple quick ones. John, how big can a barnacle on a whale get?
So the biggest species of whale barnacle is the coronet barnacle, and it gets, a really big one is almost softball size, maybe not quite that big. Yeah, so that would be the biggest one. The ones that kind of burrow in a little bit deeper, they're smaller. That's their size. I saw a question about multiple barnacles kind of stacking up on each other. That happens on barnacles that live on rocks and boats and pier pilings, but that wouldn't happen on whales because they have to attach to the skin. They don't attach to each other, except for those gooseneck barnacles, which are the whale barnacles, right? And you can have up to 20 of those living on one coronet barnacle.
Okay, wow. Jess, there was a question about whales sleeping. Can they sleep while they're swimming?
I love that question. It's one of my favorites because it's not exclusive to whales. There are many ocean animals that do it, specifically conscious sleepers, or individuals that need to, or conscious breathers that need to think about breathing even while they're in their rest cycle. And it is, the fancy scientific name for it is unihemispherical sleeping, which if you break that down just means one hemisphere refers to the two hemispheres of the brain. And many whales are able to literally turn off one side of their brain at a time and let that side rest while the other side continues either forward momentum, if the animal is logging, which is simply resting at the surface, just coming up to the surface and descending back down. And then once that side gets rest, then it just switches.
Wonderful. Okay, one more question for John Kalambukidis is, how many pounds of ghost shrimp are those sounders eating in a day?
Good. I ought to know the answer because we're actually calculating that for the first time. We're measuring that because Hannah Clayton is actually looking at how many pits, how many ghost shrimp are removed from those pits, and from our tags we know how many pits they create. And the answer is, I can't quite remember, but I think it's in the hundreds of pounds. I'm sorry, but I will be able to provide that because this is a unique opportunity the sounders give us with these pits, that we can measure how many a whale produces, and we can measure how much food is removed that we typically can't find out for any other whale exactly how much did they eat.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to take that around for everyone else to maybe mention as a parting thought, the next thing that you're hoping to learn in your area that you're studying or working in. John Zardis, would you go next?
Yeah, I mean, the big question is, how do these things find their hosts? How do the barnacle larvae, which are so tiny, microscopic things in the great wide ocean, how do they find their hosts? And I'm sure it has something to do with reproducing at a certain time of year when the whales are aggregating, and in certain hydrographic regimes where the water is not being exchanged, so that the concentration of larvae in the water can be at a certain level. But we just don't know any of that. We are learning a few things. Just did some recent studies where we found that the Cyprus stage of the barnacle is one of the fastest swimming organisms on the planet relative to body size. So Usain Bolt can run 5 body lengths per second. A cheetah can do maybe 16 body lengths per second, and a Cyprus larva can do 35 body lengths per second. So that must be important to their biology, right? And finding their hosts is that burst of swimming, probably. Anyhow, yeah, how do they find their host?
We're going to invite you back when you're ready to answer that question for us, because now we're all dying to know also. Dan, what are you working on figuring out?
It's quite simple. A direction. Right now, we get a whale with our detection technology. I can't tell you yet which direction is it swimming, only after a few detections. But if you only get 1 or 2, it's really hard. And knowing the direction they are going really hard, knowing which direction. So to even create more space between the whale and the ship, we try to know where are the whales swimming just from this one picture, not from a track. And that's, that's what we're working on.
All right, good one. And Jen?
I think something that's really needed right now is just a better understanding of whale, where and when they are and how they're using the water column in different regions, so we can really figure out how they're interacting with the gear and becoming entangled, and sort of really learning more about specific measures that we can take rather than broad brushstrokes to help the most. We want to do the best work possible, and for that we need more data. And there's a lot of fishing industries that are increasing the ability to determine where that gear came from, so we can start to answer that question. But we really need to figure out more on the whale side as well, to figure out how they're wrapping themselves up.
Okay, and Jess, bring us home with one last parting thought.
Yeah, well, it's been a while since I've been in research, but just as a marine science interpreter or an ocean educator here at the aquarium, my big focus is always on just chatting with lovely folks like you and taking the information that's being shared amongst the experts, like the people on this panel, and then bringing that back home to our incredible audiences, both here online and at the aquarium and beyond. Like I mentioned earlier, like whale conservation really started with grassroots movements, and they're kind of a solemn reminder of our impacts on the ocean, even if it's unintentional, but also really a beacon of hope for what human beings can do collectively when we put our minds to it, and global cooperation for wildlife conservation, not just for whales, but hopefully a beacon of hope for many different marine organisms that are on the endangered species list and beyond. So.
Great. Well, I encourage everyone to come visit the Seattle Aquarium and chat with you, Jess, and our other marine science interpreters with all your questions. And thank you to all of our speakers. You all were so great, fascinating talks, so fun. Thank you to our audience for joining us this evening. If you would like to help the Seattle Aquarium keep these Lightning Talks events, these free science events, accessible to all, please consider a donation if you are able. And I would love for you all to mark your calendars for our next Lightning Talks episode. It will be on May 14th, and will be all about corals. So we hope to see you again then.